Have you ever noticed that there are people who almost never post photos on social media? While so many share what they eat, where they go, who they're with, there's a group that prefers silence. They're there, they have accounts, they might even like and comment, but they rarely show their face, their routine, or their own life. And here comes the question, why? Are these people more reserved, more shy, or is there something deeper behind this digital behavior? We live in an era where exposure has become natural. Showing what we do, what we buy, and even what we feel has become part of the routine. It's almost as if what isn't posted didn't happen. But some people defy this logic. They live, and they live truly, without needing to turn everything into content. It's interesting to think that in such a noisy world, digital silence draws attention. Not posting can be a conscious choice, a way of saying, I don't need to show everything to feel good. And this behavior reveals a lot about how these people deal with their own image, with privacy, and with what they truly value. Maybe you know someone like this, or maybe you are that person. And if you are, know that there's much more psychology involved in this than it seems. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of all time, dedicated his life to understanding the human psyche in its deepest layers. He spoke about masks we wear, about the parts of ourselves we hide, and about the constant search for authenticity. And although Jung never lived in the age of social media, his ideas fit perfectly into understanding this modern phenomenon. When we talk about people who don't post photos, we're talking about something Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, beyond social expectations. These people aren't trying to build a persona for public consumption. They're not crafting an image. They're simply being, without the need for an audience. Jung believed that much of what we do is driven by what he called the persona, the mask we wear to fit into society. On social media, this mask becomes very visible. We choose the best photos, the happiest moments, the most impressive experiences. We curate a version of ourselves that we want others to see. But what happens when someone chooses not to wear that mask? What happens when they refuse to play that game? That's where it gets interesting. People who don't post much aren't necessarily rejecting society or connection. They're rejecting the false version of connection. They understand that real intimacy doesn't happen through a screen. It happens in quiet moments, in deep conversations, in shared experiences that don't need to be documented. They value the shadow, another concept Jung explored deeply. The shadow represents the parts of ourselves we hide, the things we don't want others to see. On social media, the shadow is almost entirely absent. Everything is light, everything is curated, everything is perfect. But these quiet individuals understand that wholeness includes the shadow. They don't feel the need to only show the bright side because they've made peace with all sides of themselves. In Jung's view, the psyche is always seeking balance. When we spend too much time projecting an image outward, we lose touch with what's happening inward. And that's exactly what people who avoid posting are protecting, their inner world. They understand that not everything needs to be externalized. Some things are meant to stay inside, to be felt, to be processed privately. This isn't about being secretive or closed off. It's about honoring the sacred space of the self. Jung spoke often about the importance of solitude, of turning inward, of listening to the voice that speaks only in silence. And in today's world, where noise is constant and attention is fragmented, choosing not to post is a way of preserving that inner sanctuary. It's a way of saying, I still belong to myself. These people also tend to have a strong relationship with what Jung called the self, the center of the psyche, the truest version of who we are. The self isn't concerned with likes or validation. It doesn't measure worth by external feedback. It simply is. And when you're connected to that center, the need to broadcast your life diminishes. You don't need others to affirm your existence because you already know who you are. This kind of self-knowledge doesn't come from popularity or visibility. It comes from introspection, from sitting with yourself, from asking the hard questions and being honest with the answers. People who don't post often have done this inner work. They've faced themselves, they've accepted themselves, and because of that, they don't need the world to see them to feel whole. There's also something deeply countercultural about this choice. In a society that glorifies visibility, choosing invisibility is an act of rebellion. It's a quiet rebellion, but a powerful one. It says, "I will not be defined by how many people watch me. I will define myself." Jung would have appreciated that. He believed that true individuality comes not from conformity, but from the courage to walk your own path, even when it goes against the grain. And in the digital age, not posting is one way to walk that path. It's a refusal to let algorithms dictate your sense of self. It's a refusal to let the opinions of strangers shape your identity. It's a declaration of autonomy in a world that constantly asks you to perform. But let's be clear, this isn't about superiority. It's not about being better than those who do post. It's simply about recognizing that there are different ways to exist in this world. Some people thrive in the spotlight, others thrive in the quiet. Neither is wrong. What matters is that the choice is conscious, that it comes from within, not from fear or pressure. Jung taught that consciousness is everything. When you act unconsciously, you're controlled by forces outside yourself. But when you act consciously, you reclaim your power. People who choose not to post are often acting from this place of consciousness. They've thought about it, they've chosen it, and in that choice, they've found freedom. So if you're someone who rarely shares photos, who prefers to live privately, know that you're part of a long tradition of individuals who value depth over display, meaning over metrics, and authenticity over applause. And that, according to Jung, is the path to a truly integrated self. When we talk about digital behavior, it's impossible not to notice how each person builds a different kind of relationship with social media. There are those who love to show what they're living, sharing photos, videos, thoughts, every step of the day. And there are those who prefer to observe in silence without leaving so many traces. But this doesn't mean these people are indifferent or uninterested. On the contrary, they're often more attentive, more conscious, and even more selective about what they consume. These people understand that the digital environment isn't neutral. Every like, every comment, every post creates an impression, a little piece of our public identity. And some people simply don't want that identity to depend on a photo or a specific moment. They know that on social media everything gains extra weight. A smiling photo can be interpreted as complete happiness. An absence of posts can be seen as isolation. And over time, that becomes exhausting. So what do these people do? They choose not to participate in this game of constant exposure, not because they're cold or too reserved, but because they prefer to live the experience directly without needing to translate it into images. They watch a sunset and simply appreciate it. They eat something delicious and keep that pleasure to themselves, without needing to show the plate to everyone. In a world where digital behavior is guided by algorithms, likes, and metrics, the act of not posting anything is almost a form of resistance. It's like saying, I still want to have control over my presence here. These people don't let the network dictate what's important or worthy of being shared. They decide that themselves. And this brings us back to Jung. He spoke about the collective unconscious, the shared patterns and pressures that society places on us. Social media, in many ways, is a modern manifestation of the collective. It tells us how to look, what to value, how to behave. And when you step back from that, when you refuse to conform, you're engaging in what Jung called the process of becoming conscious. You're separating yourself from the mass and reclaiming your individuality. Today, it seems we live in a silent competition for attention. Every photo, every video, every sentence posted is an attempt, conscious or not, to be seen, to be remembered, to receive that small dose of approval. But there are those who choose the opposite path. Instead of seeking popularity, they seek to preserve their own privacy. These people understand that the less you show, the more you protect. And this has nothing to do with fear. It has to do with value. They value what's intimate, what's theirs alone, what doesn't need to be validated by anyone. When someone decides not to post a photo, it's not necessarily because they don't want the world to see. It's because they understand that not everything needs to be seen. There are moments that lose their charm when they're turned into content. A genuine laugh, a quiet dinner, a casual walk. Sometimes they're more beautiful precisely because they're not being filmed. The truth is, on social media, everything that's shown becomes interpreted. And the more you expose yourself, the more space you give others to create versions of who you are. That's why those who value privacy prefer to maintain a certain mystery, a clear boundary between what's public and what's personal. This choice is a form of freedom, because when you stop worrying about others' approval, you gain total control over your own image, and most importantly, over your own time. You don't need to post to prove anything. You don't need to compare to feel sufficient. And gradually, you realize that real life is much lighter when it's not being measured by likes. Jung understood this deeply. He spoke about the tyranny of the collective, how it can suffocate the individual voice. And he believed that true psychological health comes from resisting that pressure, from honoring your own inner truth, even when it contradicts the crowd. People who don't post are practicing this resistance. They're saying no to the collective demand for constant visibility. They're saying yes to their own rhythm, their own values, their own sense of what matters. And that takes courage. It takes strength to stand apart, to be comfortable in your own silence while everyone else is shouting. But it also brings peace, because when you're not performing, you can simply be. You can exist without commentary, without judgment, without the exhausting need to manage how others perceive you. This behavior shows a type of inner strength that isn't always easy to perceive. When someone chooses not to post their photos, many people imagine that person is insecure, that they don't like their own image, or that they're ashamed to show themselves. But most of the time, it's exactly the opposite. What exists, in fact, is a silent self-confidence, a kind of security that doesn't need to be displayed to exist. Think about it. On social media, it's very easy to fall into the trap of comparison. You post something, wait for the likes, read the comments, and when the reaction doesn't come as expected, that little doubt creeps in. Wasn't it good enough? Does nobody care? This constant search for validation may seem harmless, but over time, it shapes the way we see ourselves. It's as if personal value starts to depend on what others think, and not on what we truly are. But those who don't enter this cycle generally have a more stable internal sense of value. They don't need the like to feel beautiful, nor the compliment to feel capable. These people have a quieter confidence. They trust their own judgment, their own choices, and most importantly, their own peace. And it's curious because this self-confidence often comes with a certain tranquility. They don't feel rushed to show anything. They live at their own pace without needing applause. And when they choose to share something, they do it out of desire, not out of a craving for attention. The absence of posts isn't an absence of self-esteem. It's a sign of emotional maturity. It's proof that the person is self-sufficient, that they don't need the world's validation to know who they are. And this mental posture, besides showing inner strength, also protects something very valuable: emotional health. Because when you don't live for others' approval, you live for your own peace. And that, Jung would say, is the mark of an individuated person, someone who has found their center and no longer needs external props to stand tall. We live in a time when social media seems to never rest. Information, comparison and noise all the time. And in the middle of this whirlwind, those who choose to step back a little, who decide not to post everything, are often just trying to protect something that has become rare: mental peace. The truth is that the act of not publishing can be a form of self-care. It's like placing an invisible boundary between what's yours and what belongs to the gaze of others. Because deep down, every time we post something, we open ourselves to interpretations, and those interpretations aren't always light. There are criticisms, comparisons, unnecessary comments, and even simple digital silence can hurt when we're expecting a reaction that doesn't come. People who decide to remain more reserved understand this. They know that the mind also needs rest, silence, spaces where there's no need to prove anything. And that's why they choose not to expose every detail of life, not out of fear, but out of balance. It's a type of choice that comes from within. They realize that tranquility is worth more than attention, and that you don't need to be visible all the time to feel alive. Less exposure means less comparison, less pressure, and less anxiety. And in return comes something much more valuable: real presence, focus on what's happening here and now. These people live moments completely, not looking at the screen, but looking at the moment. And that makes all the difference, because while many are worried about recording, they're simply feeling. Not posting is often an act of emotional protection, a reminder that life is more beautiful when it doesn't need to be measured in likes, and that well-being comes much more from internal connection than from external approval. Carl Jung spoke extensively about what he called psychic energy. He believed that we each have a finite amount of energy, and how we direct it determines our psychological health. When we pour too much energy outward, constantly seeking validation, constantly performing, we drain ourselves. We become disconnected from our core. People who don't post understand this instinctively. They've learned to conserve their energy, to direct it inward rather than outward. They don't spend hours crafting the perfect caption or worrying about how many people saw their story. Instead, they invest that energy in real relationships, in creative projects, in personal growth. Jung also spoke about introversion and extroversion, not as fixed personality types, but as orientations of psychic energy. Introverts draw energy from within. Extroverts draw it from the outside world. And while posting on social media might energize an extrovert, it can drain an introvert. For introverted individuals, the idea of constantly broadcasting their life feels exhausting, even invasive. It violates their natural need for privacy and internal processing. But even extroverts who don't post often are making a conscious choice. They've realized that the energy exchange on social media isn't always balanced. You give so much: your image, your time, your attention, and what you get back is often hollow. A heart emoji doesn't replace a real conversation. A comment doesn't replace genuine connection. So they withdraw, not from life, but from the performance of life. And here's where Jung's concept of the psyche's need for wholeness becomes relevant. Wholeness, for Jung, meant integrating all parts of yourself: the light and the shadow, the public and the private, the known and the unknown. When we live too much in the public eye, we fragment ourselves. We show only certain parts, the acceptable parts, the attractive parts, and the rest gets buried. But those buried parts don't disappear. They linger in the shadow, and over time, they demand attention. People who choose privacy are maintaining their wholeness. They're not splitting themselves into a public persona and a private self. They're simply living as one integrated being. What you see is what exists, and what exists doesn't need to be broadcasted to be real. This integration brings a deep sense of peace because there's no dissonance, no performance anxiety, no gap between who you are and who you appear to be. And this brings us to another important point. Not sharing everything doesn't mean being antisocial. In fact, it can mean exactly the opposite. Someone who values real contact, eye to eye, sincere conversations outside the screens. There's a very common misconception, thinking that those who don't post, who prefer to stay quiet on the networks, are cold, distant, or even antisocial people. But that's far from the truth. Most of the time, these people are extremely sociable. They just prefer to live socialization outside the screens. They like being with friends, talking, laughing, participating, but they don't feel the need to turn everything into content. For them, the value of the moment is in living the moment, not in showing the moment. They're the type of person who goes to a gathering, enjoys every second, and when they get home, realizes they didn't even take a photo. And that's okay, because what mattered was being present, not recording. In practice, those who don't publish much on social media tend to have stronger, more genuine relationships. They're not worried about the appearance of connection, but with connection itself. They're people who prefer to look into your eyes instead of typing, who remember details from the conversation, who know how to listen without thinking about the next story. It's interesting to notice how online silence doesn't mean isolation, but choice. The choice to prioritize what's real, what's intimate, what happens away from the pressure to appear. Because sometimes the less we show ourselves, the more we find ourselves. These people understand that the virtual world is just a part of life, important but not everything, and they don't feel obligated to always be available or visible. They live with more calm, with more privacy, with more truth. So not posting isn't being antisocial. It's just a different and often healthier way of being present in the world. A way that values silence as much as speech and real encounters more than virtual ones. Jung believed that modern society suffers from what he called a loss of soul. We've become so focused on the external, on achievement, on appearance, that we've forgotten the inner life. And people who choose not to post are reclaiming their soul. They're saying, my inner life matters more than my public image. And in doing so, they're living more fully, more authentically, more in alignment with what Jung believed was the ultimate goal of human existence, to become who you truly are. And this behavior has a deep root. It's born from authenticity, from a sincere desire to be who you are without needing to prove anything to anyone. Deep down, what moves these people is something simple but powerful: authenticity. They don't feel the need to follow the rhythm of the networks, nor to fit into the trends of the moment. They live according to their own time, with their own purpose, without hurry to show, without fear of missing out. While many worry about building an image, those who choose not to post so much worry about being. Being truly, without filters, without scripts, without that constant effort to seem happy all the time. It's a form of silent authenticity, almost discreet, but one that reveals enormous inner strength. These people understand that living doesn't need an audience, that a moment can be special just because it happened, even if no one saw it. They seek meaning, not applause, and this difference changes everything. When you live with purpose, the need to prove disappears. You start doing things out of desire, not to show that you're doing them, and this brings immense freedom, the freedom to be faithful to yourself. Authenticity also brings peace, because it eliminates the weight of comparison. You don't need to follow what everyone does. You don't need to be everywhere, nor record everything. You choose what truly matters to you, and that's what keeps you centered. These people see life as a collection of moments, not posts, and because of that, they manage to live in a lighter way, more truthful, more connected to what truly has value. They know they don't need to appear all the time to exist, and that the purpose of life isn't in how many people see you, but in how many people you truly touch. Carl Jung spoke about what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to hold opposites in tension and create something new from that tension. And in many ways, people who choose not to post are embodying this function. They're holding the tension between connection and solitude, between presence and privacy, between being seen and being unknown. They're not rejecting one for the other. They're integrating both. They participate in the digital world, but on their own terms. They connect with others, but not at the cost of losing themselves. This kind of psychological flexibility is rare. Most people swing to one extreme or the other. Either they're completely public, sharing everything, or they're completely withdrawn, rejecting technology altogether. But those in the middle, those who engage selectively, are practicing what Jung would call the middle way. They're not driven by compulsion, they're driven by choice, and that choice reflects a mature relationship with the self. Jung also believed that symbols are the language of the unconscious. And in the digital age, our posts, our photos, our curated images are symbols. They represent something deeper, a desire to be loved, to be seen, to matter. But when you're already secure in those things, when you already know you matter, the need to create those symbols diminishes. You don't need to symbolize your worth because you already embody it. People who don't post have often done the inner work to reach that place. They've confronted their insecurities. They've healed their wounds. They've stopped seeking externally what can only be found internally. And because of that, they're free. Free from the endless cycle of posting, waiting, hoping, feeling disappointed. Free from the need to be affirmed by strangers. Free to simply live. And this brings us to the final point of this journey. In a world where everyone wants to be seen, choosing what to show or what not to show is an act of courage and consciousness. In a world where everyone wants to be seen, where every instant seems to need digital proof, choosing not to show is an act of courage. It's going against the flow. It's saying with tranquility, my life doesn't need to be displayed to be real. This choice not to post everything isn't escape. It's consciousness. It's knowing that privacy is also a form of power, because when you choose what to show, you reclaim control over your own narrative. You decide what's yours, what you want to share, and what you want to protect. Showing less doesn't mean living less. It means living with more intention. It means being whole in the moment, without worrying about the angle, the filter, the caption. It means savoring life truly instead of turning it into content. People who understand this live with more lightness. They don't measure their own value by others' reactions, and because of that, they feel less pressure. They know that happiness isn't in the likes, but in the experiences that no one needs to see to know they were real. And perhaps this is the great learning from all of this. Freedom isn't in showing everything, it's in choosing what to show. Because when we feel free to keep moments just for ourselves, life gains another flavor. It becomes quieter, more authentic, more true. So if you're one of those people who prefers to live instead of post, know that this doesn't make you less interesting. In fact, it shows you've found something many people are still looking for, the peace of being who you are, even when no one is watching. And in the end, perhaps this is the greatest sign of emotional maturity in the digital world, the capacity to choose your own way of existing without needing to prove anything to anyone. Jung spent his life encouraging people to embark on the journey of individuation, to become who they truly are, beneath all the layers of conditioning, expectation, and performance. And in today's world, one way to begin that journey is to step back from the constant noise of social media, to stop performing and start being, to stop seeking validation and start seeking truth. The people who rarely post photos aren't missing out. They're not disconnected or irrelevant. They're simply living from a different place, a place of inner authority, quiet confidence, and deep self-knowledge. They've learned that the most important relationship they'll ever have is the one with themselves. And they're honoring that relationship by protecting it, nurturing it, and refusing to let it be commodified or reduced to a collection of images. That, according to Carl Jung, is the path to a life well lived. Not a life well displayed, but a life deeply felt, fully experienced, and authentically yours.